All right, it's 11:45 a.m. here on Sunday, the 18th of September. This is my second episode of Dylan Knows in 10, 12 hours, probably. In 12 hours, yep. Because I started my last one almost exactly around the same time. Actually, I started at 11:30, I think, 11:35, but close enough. It was 12 hours ago. But this is a special weekend. September 15th was my 9th anniversary of my show. It was on a Thursday, so I don't usually do a show on Thursdays. So I figured I would celebrate my 9th anniversary today, doing something a little different. I've been meaning to do this for a while. The Spider-Man 60th anniversary, I've been planning on doing it for a while, so I figured this would be the best time to do it. So it'll be Spider-Man's 60th anniversary show and my 9th anniversary show. Nice. 60th and 9th. Nice. Anywho, I'm going to try to run through this real quick here because the Ravens are going to play at 1 o'clock with my football team, and I want to hold on to that. And it shouldn't be too long. I've got some notes that slipped through that came out last night after the show that I want to mention, and then talk a little about my 9th anniversary show. Then I'm going to do my Spider-Man show because I'm just going to tell basically how I became enamored of Spider-Man, and I'll do a bunch of top 10 lists and special things as well. And then we'll be done. So we got about 5 pages of stuff, but it shouldn't be too much since it's just 10th anniversary, 60th anniversary. So about an hour and 15 minutes. That seems to be about the right amount of time for this show. So let's start right away with the stuff that came out after my show last night. Fortnite's new season started this morning. It is called Paradise. The trailers came out after last season's vibe and relax and fun adventure. This one ramps up the terror again with a chrome sort of fluid like the T-1000 Terminator 2 creature has taken over the island. So you've got all kinds of new stuff like that. New battle pass is okay. Spider-Gwen's in there. There is an anime skin that a lot of people don't like, but it looks pretty cool to me. There seems to be a glitch, though, because there's a new character that I like the looks of, but when I clicked on her avatar or whatever, an emote chopped up for a different character. So I don't know if that's a glitch or what's going on with that. So hopefully it'll be fixed eventually. I did buy the battle pass. So I'm now presently level 26 right now. So I got the first 25 levels of stuff, including the Paradigm skin, which is now voiced by Brie Larson from Captain Marvel. She's a big gamer anyway, so it makes sense for her to do that. So that's pretty cool. So right now I haven't really had a chance to really go into depth. I had the Battle Pass trailer and I saw the regular trailer. They've got some new stuff coming up. I'll probably play a little bit after the football game. So we'll let you know more about it next week. This is kind of cool. Dubai is building a $5 billion moon-shaped resort, where it's going to be moon-shaped in Dubai, and it's going to simulate conditions on the moon. So that sounds pretty cool. For $5 billion, yeah, I hope you'll be able to do zero gravity and dirt and stuff like that and see some cool stuff. So that's intriguing. I think that's kind of interesting about that. Again, real quick, my 9th anniversary show started off as a spinoff of Snark Alec Radio way back in 2013. Snark Alec Radio started in 2012. Snark Alecs were a group of people that made fun of the sci-fi Saturday night movies, and we sort of spread out to other TV shows, and then we started talking more on the internet, and then we started meeting for Snark Stock at different places and became friends, stuff like that. So it is true you can find friends on the internet, and I did. So, but once sci-fi stopped doing the B movies and we all started sort of our separate ways, the Snark Alecs has sort of dissolved. Snark Alec Radio ended. And Tony Solo and I used to do a show together. Also, that ended. Kelly Toole and Mike Belinsky still do a show periodically. And this is my show, so I'm still the currently longest running show of the Snark Alecs, episode 465, as it were. So not much else I can say about my 9th anniversary. So next year is the big one, my 10th anniversary. So I have a full year now to figure out what exactly I'm going to do, which is kind of funny because next year is going to be huge for me all around. It's my 10th anniversary of this show. It's my 20th wedding anniversary. It's my 50th birthday. And it's my sister and brother-in-law's 30th anniversary. So I got a whole bunch of weird, wild stuff happening next year. So that's all the stuff that came up. Oh, no, and there was one more thing. I do this periodically because at my work, we listen to the radio, and the commercials that air on the radio are so god awful now. There's some that are okay, but there are some that are so stupid. And I talked about this a few episodes ago, whatever. I had a time where I complained about it. We'll have a few more complaints about more commercials I have heard recently. So the first one is one I've heard from two separate people, commercial companies, who are saying that their prices are so low they will not advertise them on the radio. Why not? I know you say that and you're hoping like, oh, I got to see what that is. And they're going to come to the store and maybe they'll be disappointed by how low the prices are. Why don't you just tell them? So they're like, oh shit, I'm going to go to the store. They can say, no, I'm going to pass. I know it's a way to get people to come to your store, but too low to advertise, that makes absolutely no sense. You want to advertise your low price stuff. Come on, man. Seriously? Jesus. I know you want to get them to the store, but that's an easy way to get them to the store. Say, you can get this for 70% off. Holy shit, I need that. I'm going to go get that. Morons. Another one for cell phones, like a cell phone provider, has a woman going to a palmist, and the palmist starts reading her palm, and she starts actually talking more like she's psychic and not a palmist. She says it at the beginning of the thing. You want your palm read. But then she starts talking like she's psychic, and then the woman goes off on her cell phone group or the problem with that, and she ends with like, but you knew that already, didn't you? And she's like, oh yeah, I knew that. No, palmistry is not being psychic. Palmistry reads the lines on your hand. They're not like, oh, I'm going to psychically say, oh, you're do this. No, they are more along the lines of reading your lifeline, your love line. You can see, like this line right here, it branches off a couple ways. So maybe I have multiple loves, or my lifeline, you have a long lifeline or not. It's just, that's what it is. It's palmistry. It's reading the lines in your hand. It's not, using my palm, I think you're doing this. No, it's not being psychic. Psychic and palmistry are two different things. And this commercial has no fucking clue that they're different. Come on, man. Jesus. Even I know that. And finally, there's this new insurance company that complains about, we don't like jingles and mascots and stuff like that. We just are good for good insurance. So if you have a jingle or mascot, you have bad insurance. It's a way for them to get people to buy their insurance by saying that if you have a mascot or jingle, you have bad insurance, which is not true. Jingles and mascots are just a way to draw people's attention because people are stupid. And it's a way to draw their attention to stuff. And people sometimes like these kind of things. They like to have these jingles and like that. But their insurance may be fucking better than yours. But, because they have jingles and mascots, their insurance must suck. No, you don't know that. I know you're trying to get people to come to your insurance, but you don't know that people who use jingles and mascots, their insurance is bad. So why don't you just fuck off with that stupid commercial? And I'm done with that. That's my rant. More to come once I hear more stupid commercials. Now we'll get into Spider-Man stuff. First up, just a general thing. This is a good way to start off Spider-Man's 60th anniversary. A study found that Spider-Man is overwhelmingly America's favorite superhero. More than Batman, more than Wolverine, more than Superman, more than Wonder Woman. Spider-Man is overwhelmingly the favorite superhero of America. And it makes sense because Spider-Man was always supposed to be an everyman, was supposed to be superheroes, Bruce Wayne has a lot of money, Wonder Woman is a goddess who's gorgeous. Superman is super powered and strong and has a hot, sexy wife. Peter Parker, while he does have hot, sexy love interests, he's a loser. Bad things happen to him all the time, and that's his character. And he's able, what makes him so great is he's able to overwhelm how terrible things are and is able to succeed on the end. Now, this current run they're doing right now, I'm not the biggest fan of Zeb Wells' writing, and he's really, really pushing the terribleness of Spider-Man, and I'm not in that. I'm collecting it because I want to have a complete set of Spider-Man. I'll tell you why in a second, but I am not enjoying it. Actually, coming off of Nick Spencer's absolutely phenomenal, I can't believe I'm saying that about Nick Spencer, his phenomenal run on Spider-Man. So Yeah, so that is understandable because he is Spider-Man, despite the fact that he does have these superpowers, is very relatable. He has trouble making his rent. He has trouble with his love life. He causes more problems than successes. People hate him, stuff like that. So it makes it kind of fun and interesting, and I like that. And one other last note before we get into the top 10 stuff. Spider-Man's best animated series will be coming to Disney Plus next month. I don't know exactly which one that is because there have been so many Spider-Man animated series. It's not funny. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which was outstanding. The one where Neil Patrick Harris was the voice of Peter Parker was really, really good, but that didn't last too long. I think there was this one that they're talking about is the big one that came out a while ago. I never really watched them, I guess, because when they came out, I was at that point where, last night I was talking about the shows I was watching, like G.I. Joe, Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman animated series. But I think the Spider-Man ones came out after all that when I was grown up and stuff like that. So I wasn't watching it as much. And I also went through a period there where I stopped collecting comics. So real quick, here's my Spider-Man adventure. My father, he was a collector of Spider-Man. It was the only comic book he collected, and he had a lot of them. And when I came along, I think he had stopped collecting it at that time. And when I got old enough, he didn't want to get rid of them, so he decided to hand them over to me to give me something to do with myself, read and enjoy it as much as he has. So when I was younger, I didn't really read it. I just looked at the pictures and I understood some of the words, but I got the story because you could tell the story in the pictures. So I kind of knew what was going on, but I just wanted to kind of look at it and see how things are. And I did read some of it, and I became hooked on Spider-Man. So I had all these Spider-Man books. I still have them actually around this house somewhere. And I still have all these old ones. I mean, he has really old ones. Like he has like issue number 75 of Spider-Man and stuff like that. Now, he also liked to keep them in binders. So there's 3 hole punches in the comics. So that reduces the ability to sell it for a lot of money. But at that time, as I mentioned last week also about comics, people didn't care. People weren't buying them to collect them and keep them for big money. That didn't happen until the late 80s, early 90s. But people were just doing it, and that's what they're supposed to be. You bought them, you read them, you pass them on to your siblings, your best friends, whatever, and then you throw them out, or you stored them somewhere, but the covers were all ragged. People were reading them over and over again. There was drawings on them. There were tears in them, but nobody cared. There's a comic book. But then all of a sudden in the late 80s, early 90s is when the comic industry boomed with people wanting to make their comics mint so they could sell them for millions of dollars, which almost destroyed the whole comic book industry. But I've already talked about that. We're not going to do that because it's about Spider-Man. So while I was reading my dad's collection, I would get money from doing chores, my allowance, stuff like that, chores and other stuff as well. And I would spend mostly probably all my money on Spider-Man comics. Now, they came out usually weekly because at that time there was Amazing Spider-Man and Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Marvel Team Up and Marvel Tales. Those were the 4 that I remember most during my time growing up. And so I would get those. And then gradually when I would go, we had a place called the News Center. It's a newsstand that newsstands don't exist anymore, but they used to have everything. Had newspapers, had magazines, had candy, had cards, had all kinds of stuff, toys and such. And I went to the News Center almost every week and bought new Spider-Man comics. And if there weren't any Spider-Man comics, I probably would go away. But then, other comics started coming out when Star Wars was big. I saw Star Wars comics. I like Star Wars, so I'd buy them. If Spider-Man was crossing over into like Fantastic Four, the Avengers, or the Defenders, or any of these other comic books, I would buy that comic because Spider-Man was in it. And I wasn't really into the DC stuff until 86 when Crisis happened, and John Byrne, who was one of my favorite artist writers, went over to do Superman. And then I also have I bought Batman Year One when it first came out, Frank Miller and Dave Mazzucchelli's classic story. So I bought those when they first came out. So in 86 is around the time that I sort of shifted to DC, but I still stick with Spider-Man and other Marvel comics. But that led to me reading other comics. Spider-Man was the first one to get me into comics. And then as I saw him appearing in other comics, or in Marvel Team Up, where he teamed up with other heroes, I would say, okay, I want to follow this hero a little bit more. So I would find the Avengers or their own solo title or whatever. I'd buy those comics. I'd have them to read. So that's how my comic book habit came to be. Now, my comic book habit has gone downhill recently. I just haven't had time to do as much reading as I would like, and I'm not going to the comic store as much as I used to. And that's regrettable, but at the same time, is we need to save money. And there's really not a lot of stuff that's enticing out there anymore now, but I'm still collecting Spider-Man and his myriad of appearances. So we've sort of come, I guess, a full circle a little bit. So that's how I've gone about it. I've tried getting my kids excited about Spider-Man. They like the movies, but the comics not so much. Now, my daughter likes a bunch of the comics. She's like a Miss Marvel fan and Stranger Things and other stuff as well. My wife is a Captain Marvel fan and like Stranger in Paradise sort of stuff. So things like that. But I'm still a fan, and that's my history of Spider-Man. So here we are, 15 minutes in, about 16 minutes in. Now we're going to do sort of the top 10 stuff. We're going to get a little bit more into what I like about things and weird stories and highlights and all kinds of fun stuff. And we're going to talk about, and I'll have discussions about everything on the list and stuff like that. Not really long ones, but enough to get it out there. So first thing we're going to do is, of course, you need to have a writer. So here are my top 10 Spider-Man writers. Coming at number 10 is Nick Spencer, who, as I told you, I'm surprised how much I enjoyed his run, because Nick Spencer was the guy who did the Hydra Captain America, which is a god-awful storyline. And I was surprised when he came on, but Nick Spencer did what nobody else was even thinking about doing. He fixed Spider-Man because of what previous writers have done and screwed up the timeline and screwed up all this other stuff. He came in and he fixed things so that we were back to a status quo, and then Zeb Wells comes in and destroys all that shit. But besides the point, Nick Spencer was a long-term writer on it, loved the Spider-Man, loved the Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson being together. So I'm glad that he brought that back in and did some other stuff, but and explored other big storylines from a new perspective and came up with his own really good ones. Like Central Park was turned into one of Arcade's madhouses, and they put all the animal villains and superheroes in one area, and it became a hunt free for all. So that was kind of cool. So I give Nick Spencer credit that I hated his Captain America, but his Spider-Man run was phenomenal. Number 9, we've got David Michelinie. He was the guy who created Venom. He's the one who was working with Todd McFarlane during the time. He was the one that Marvel used to do subscriptions that you could get the comics through the mail. And of course, Spider-Man was the one that I got a subscription for. So I got the subscriptions for these Spider-Mans, and they came delivered to my house. Dave Michelinie and had been well known as the writer of Iron Man and did a really good run on Iron Man with Bob Layton. And now he came over to Spider-Man and worked with Todd McFarlane and then Eric Larson on Spider-Man, and did some pretty good stories. As I said, he's the one that created Venom. Coming in number 8, we have Marv Wolfman, who was a guy that sort of became more famous when he went over to DC with, I think, Crisis and the Teen Titans and stuff like that. But he was a writer on Spider-Man during that late 70s, early to mid 80s sort of period, and told some of the best stories around like the 200 number, had created the Black Cat, stuff like that. So that was kind of interesting as well. Tom DeFalco comes in at number 7. He was an editor at Marvel who became a writer on Spider-Man. He came on later in the 80s and and had a good run on it. And again, another of the times where I got subscriptions, Tom DeFalco was the writer of those as well. Coming in number 6 is Jerry Conway. I'm not exactly quite sure the timing of it, but Jerry Conway was one of those writers that came in soon after Stan Lee left the series, and might have been the heir apparent, but I can't remember. I don't know the exact time frame of who all the writers were. These are just ones that I remember. But Jerry Conway was one of those that came in sort of after Stan Lee. Might not have been exactly right after Stan Lee, but he was there, and he was the first different take on Spider-Man, and he knocked it out of the park. Did a pretty good job of that. Hence he's number 6. Number 5 is one of my favorite writers of all time. Anyway, his bigger run that most people know him more for is The Incredible Hulk, which was a phenomenal. If there was an Incredible Hulk top 10 writers list, he'd be number 1 on the list for me. But Peter David. Now, Peter David wasn't really on the main series too much. He wrote a couple of really quirky one-shot sort of things. The one I remember most is The Commuter, where Spider-Man was taken out of his comfort zone in the city and chasing a villain into the suburbs, which was a completely different experience, which was amazingly funny. He also brought in Frogman and Toad to have sort of a battle royale sort of thing. But he also wrote one of the best Spider-Man stories of all time, which we'll get into in a little bit. I'm not going to say it right now, but he did write one of those. And he also was on Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, had some other funny storylines, which I'm also going to talk about here in a little bit. And more recently, he's been writing he also was the creator of Spider-Man 2099, which was a spinoff of the Spider-Man series, and wrote that series for a long time with Rick Lenardi, both of whom will be discussed later on. And then he's been doing these, I can't remember what they're called, but these 5-issue miniseries now that fills in sort of the gaps in some of the, sort of like an untold stories of Spider-Man, which we'll get into a little bit also. But they're 5-issue miniseries that has Greg Land art on it, and they're the most recent stuff where he's still in the Venom costume, and Black Cat is still his lover and stuff like that. So these are more like stuff in the late 80s sort of stuff. So he's revisiting that. So Peter David is number 5 on my list. Number 4, of course, is, I know it seems a little high for him to be, or rather low, I should say, to be there, but Stan Lee is number 4 of my top 4. There are 3, in my personal opinion, 3 better writers than Stan Lee, which I know is hard to say because he created the character, but Stan Lee's stories were much like they were in the 60s. They were good stories, but at the same time, they were 1960s Spider-Man stories. And not a lot of like nuance and stuff like that. It was just straight, and that was fine for the time, and it's great, and there's nothing wrong with it. All these writers are fantastic, but Stan Lee is coming in at number 4 for me. Number 3 is, I think, the longest tenured Spider-Man writer right now, Dan Slott. He wrote Spider-Man back after one last day, and then became like one of the guys that there was a Spider-Man by Committee series, and then he took over with Brand New Day and then ran it for like 4 or 5 years, had some, maybe closer to 10 years actually, had some of the best storylines, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. And he left on a high note, and then he announced earlier this summer that he will be returning in a brand new Spider-Man series with Mark Bagley, which I think is outstanding. So I can't wait to see that. So that's going to be a new one on my list as well. But Dan Slott is number 3. Number 2, J.M. DeMatteis wrote my favorite Spider-Man story of all time. We'll talk about that in just about a second. Not a second, a couple minutes. But also had a spectacular run on Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, where he ran for about 3 or 4 years writing stuff, and it was just some of the best Spider-Man stories out there. To me, number 1, the best Spider-Man writer of all time is Roger Stern. Roger Stern had amazing stories. In the mid 200s to upper 200s, he was the writer, created some of the best stories, I think he was involved with the black costume Spider-Man. He created the Hobgoblin, I believed. He had some of the other greatest stories of all time, which we'll talk about here in a second. And Roger Stern, whenever I think of Spider-Man, I think of Roger Stern first and foremost. So I have some honorable mention. First up, Kurt Busiek, who I absolutely adore. His Astro City is phenomenal. He did a series called Untold Tales of Spider-Man, which he set during the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko era, where he was Spider-Man was in high school. But Kurt Busiek is so, anal is not the proper word, but he's so particular about stuff that he had to place the storylines perfectly, in the stories so that they would they would fit in perfectly with the stories. And he did a wonderful job like that. Bill Mantlo is another one that did some underrated stuff in the mid 80s of Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man. Nothing like crazy outstanding, but still solid work for him. And I also think he wrote a lot of the Marvel team-up stories with Spider-Man. Chip Zdarsky, who came on to a Spider-Man thing and is sort of coming to his own as a writer. He was always known sort of as a clown comic artist, but he created some very interesting dynamics and some stories in the most recent stuff like that. Brian Michael Bendis never wrote for the 616 Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man or Peter Parker and like that, but he did create the Ultimate Spider-Man and stayed on that for 100 plus issues, and that's an outstanding series of its own right as well. So I got to put him in here, even though it's not technically regular Spider-Man series. And finally, despite some of his awful stories, he did have some interesting ideas, took Spider-Man in a whole new direction. J. Michael Straczynski's run on Spider-Man, while it has a lot of issues, there is some interesting good stuff in there as well. So good on it. So those are the top 10 Spider-Man writers. The top 10 Spider-Man stories. Coming at number 10, Spider-Man versus Wolverine, a one-shot where the two of them had really never teamed up together, but now were involved in a case that ended up with the death of one of Spider-Man's supporting characters, Ned Leeds, which kind of put a damper on things because Ned Leeds was supposed to be the Hobgoblin, and yet the Hobgoblin was still around even after Ned Leeds died. And then it was revealed that Ned Leeds was the Hobgoblin, but then someone else came in and took his place. It was all kind of screwy, but Spider-Man versus Wolverine was a astounding one-shot. I forget. I think Mark Bright might have done the artwork for it, and I forgot who wrote it. But it was a really good story, a one-shot, double-sized, like 48 pages, and it had Spider-Man accidentally killing somebody because he had been fighting Wolverine and was not holding back because Wolverine is at adamantium, and then someone came towards him and thought it was Wolverine, so he put all this power in and ended up killing this dude. So that was kind of an interesting story. Number 9 was the Captain Universe storyline, where Eric Larson did the artwork for it, and I believe Micheline was the writer of that. Basically, the Captain Universe is a being, a spirit or whatever, that enters into people's bodies and gives them godlike powers. And so they decided they wanted to do something with Spider-Man to see what a loser, hard luck case like Spider-Man would do with ultimate power, and it did not disappoint. So outstanding like that. Number 8, I probably should have put this higher up, but it's more of just a one-shot instead of a multi-story arc. But Roger Stern strikes with The Boy Who Loves Spider-Man. It was a backup to one of his issues. I believe it was Spider-Man 248. It was a backup to that where Spider-Man gets a letter from a boy who is dying of cancer and is a huge Spider-Man fan. So he comes and visits him, and they have a conversation, and then Peter Parker, who's very protective of his secret identity, reveals himself to the boy as Peter Parker, and eventually the boy does die of cancer. So it is an absolutely astounding story, wonderful story, and reason why Roger Stern is up there at the top. Number 7, the death of Gwen Stacy. I believe that was Jerry Conway. Jerry Conway was the writer of that. He was my number 6 on the series. He wrote the Death of Gwen Stacy story, a 2-parter that to this day is still emulated through movies and all kinds of stuff. But it was a hard thing because it was Spider-Man's, as they were claimed at the time, his true love, even though I believe MJ Watson is, but that's besides the point. But Gwen Stacy at the time was his true love, and they had a rough patch, but then they had gotten back together and things seemed to be bright for them. And then Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin ends up killing her. So a harsh 2-parter, but is a very definitive moment in Spider-Man's life. So there we go. Number 6, Roger Stern strikes again. Nothing can stop the Juggernaut. The Juggernaut is usually known as a X-Men villain. And in this case, Roger decided he wanted to see what would happen if Spider-Man went up against an unstoppable creation like the Juggernaut, because nobody else was around, and because Spider-Man never gives up despite things. Spider-Man gets the crap beaten out of him, but is able in the end to stop the Juggernaut's rampage in a 2-parter. I think it's 229 and 230, if I remember correctly. So that was fantastic. Dan Slott's first story on here out of 2, the Superior Spider-Man storyline, which lasted a pretty long time. It had its own 36 issue series, and there was some lead up to it, and then there was like some aftermath. So for about 2 to 3 years, Superior Spider-Man was the Spider-Man comic. The basic premise behind that is Dr. Octopus is dying, and he's able to find a way to switch places with Peter Parker. Their souls switch places, and Peter Parker ends up in the dying body of Doc Ock, and Doc Ock ends up in the body of the powerful Peter Parker Spider-Man. They look like each other, so no one would believe that that actually happened. So Doc Ock takes over as Spider-Man, and that's where Superior Spider-Man comes in because he believes he could be the best Spider-Man there is. And he takes a look at Peter Parker's life and says, what is this fool doing with his life? And ends up fixing it and makes him very successful. And at the same time, Peter Parker's still lingering around there and using it as like a conscience sort of thing. So Dr. Octopus is not going full evil on this aspect, but he has his moments where he's a little bit more of a pain, but he fixes a lot of what made Spider-Man Spider-Man and turned him into the Superior Spider-Man. So it's a very good story. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. So there's that. Number 4, I believe this is Tom DeFalco, Firelord, the Firelord story, episode issues 269 and 270, one of my absolute favorite two-parters. Firelord is a herald of Galactus, another all-powerful being like the Juggernaut sort of thing, and nobody is around to take him on as he's going on a rampage in New York City. So Spider-Man has to suck it up and do it again, and it has one of the best ending sequences in a comic ever. So Firelord story is number 4. Number 3, Dan Slott makes a return again with his Spider-Verse storyline, which is considered to be one of the best things and has influenced a lot of different things. All these different Spider-Mans from across the different realities, all types. You've got, the one that's an actual spider. You got one made up of a million spiders. You got a gay one. You've got a noir one. You've got a rock star punk one. You have a female one in Spider-Gwen. You've got all these different ones. Spider-Ham is in there as well. So you gather all these together, and it became a huge battle royale. And just seeing all the different types of Spider-Man that not only Dan Slott could create, but he got a bunch of people like Christos Gage and other people to come in and create their own versions of it. They did Spider-Verse miniseries, which introduced these other Spider-Man to the world, Spider-Man and Spider-Women to the world, and had their own little stories about how they were doing stuff and like that. So Spider-Verse was a huge, massive undertaking. It's had multiple sequels, and I think the end of the Spider-Verse is happening now in comics right now. So, but yeah, for the longest time, it's been huge. And as I said, it's been an influence on a lot of different things. So moving on with that. Number 2, Peter David. I talked about him being my number 5 of Spider-Man writers. The story that is still my second all-time favorite story is Who Killed Jean DeWolff, which Jean DeWolff was a minor character, supporting character who appeared periodically in the series over about a period of 10 years. She was a captain, and it starts off with her getting brutally murdered in her apartment, and Spider-Man going to investigate because he had a friendly relationship with her, like a Batman, Commissioner Gordon sort of thing, and discovered that Jean DeWolff actually was interested in Spider-Man and always photoshopped pictures of her and him together and had an interest in him personally. And so he felt that he owed it to her to try to solve the case. And this in turn brings Matt Murdock into the storyline as his Daredevil, and it turns into a serial killing sort of investigation story with Daredevil and Spider-Man teaming up to take on someone called the Sin Eater, who goes around shooting people with shotguns and killing them. He's a serial killer. So it's an outstanding story, wonderful ending, and strengthened the Batman-Daredevil connection that I'll talk about in a little bit as well. Finally, my absolute favorite Spider-Man story of all time, J.M. DeMatteis, my second writer on my top writer list, wrote Kraven's Last Hunt, an extraordinarily outstanding 9-issue crossing over Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Web of Spider-Man for 3 months. Glorious Mike Zeck, Bob McLeod artwork, and a wonderful story about Kraven burying Spider-Man alive, then taking over as Spider-Man and cleaning up the city. And then Spider-Man coming out of his grave after a couple weeks and having to go out and stop Kraven. It is an absolutely incredible story. If you read only one Spider-Man story your whole life, you should read Kraven's Last Hunt. Absolutely amazing. Some honorable mentions here real quick. Harry Osborn's Drug Story is famous for Stan Lee wrote it with Gil Kane artwork. It was the Comics Code Authority refused to authorize the series to be released to the public, but Stan Lee, being Stan Lee, was able to circumvent that and release the two-part storyline with Harry Osborn's drug use made in the 70s out to the public and became a really good story. It was sort of like a one-two bang sort of thing, but about 30 issues before Gwen Stacy died, her father, Captain Stacy, who was a police captain, much like Jean DeWolf was, and who was friendly with Spider-Man, ends up getting killed in a fight between Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus. And that in turn makes Gwen hate Spider-Man and take off for Paris, and her and Peter sort of have a separation for a while. So that's a pretty big story. There used to be in the 80s and 90s graphic novels that were just hardbound that would tell just amazing stories. Roger Stern, again, along with Mike Mignola, did a Doctor Strange, Doctor Doom graphic novel, which was outstanding. But Charles Vess, an absolutely fantastic painter, did a graphic novel called Spirits of the Earth. Or not Spirit, that was the one that he did for their honeymoon, which is also good. So we'll do Spirits of the Earth and the Wendigo story that they did also in this hardcover graphic novels. Charles Vess is absolutely gorgeous artist, and two kind of supernatural-esque sort of stories with the Spirits of the Earth and the Wendigo storyline. Cry of the Wendigo is that one. Both phenomenal artwork and just a wonderful, wonderful one-shot Spider-Man graphic novels. One of the reasons why I put J. Michael Straczynski on my honorable mention list, despite the fact that he wrote some of the worst stories, he also wrote one of the best ones that came out after September 11th, 2001. New York was attacked. Spider-Man is the consummate New Yorker, so you had to have an issue that focused on his reaction to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and it is, as you expected, is amazing. And finally, after the success of Kraven's Last Hunt, the crossovers between Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Web of Spider-Man increased with two new stories. One was Spider-Man MIA, where Spider-Man disappears and the Black Cat and other people try to find him. All that's left is his shredded costume, so they think that he's dead, and they have to figure out a way to try to find him. And Ann Nocenti, who I absolutely love, then did a story called Who is Spider-Man, where Spider-Man was placed in an insane asylum and has to regain his life and his conscience. So those are some of the best stories. I'm sure there's plenty of other ones out there, but there's just not enough time and too many to talk about. Because now we're going to get into the top 25 Spider-Man artists. Because as I was doing the Spider-Man artists, I couldn't just lay it down to 10 because there were so many good ones. So I'm just going to run through boom real quick with a little comments here and there. Number 25 is Sarah Pichelli. The reason why she's that low is because she was the artist for Ultimate Spider-Man, which again is not the 616 Spider-Man, which is what this story is mostly about, but is still considered a part of Spider-Man lore and good artwork. And she's the one that helped create Miles Morales. So I had to put her on the list at number 25. Number 24, Mike Zeck. Again, he was the artist on Kraven's Last Hunt, but did not really do any other Spider-Man stories. Artwork for them. He was more of a Captain America artist, which was phenomenal stuff, and the Punisher miniseries as well. But I had to put him on there because Kraven's Last Hunt is absolutely gorgeous, not only from the writing perspective, but from the artwork's perspective as well. And he also was the artist of Secret Wars, which brought about the black and white Spider-Man costume, which I think Mike Zeck helped create as well. Number 23 is journeyman Alex Solvik, not the greatest artist of all time, but a guy that is consistent, will be able to get you stuff on your deadlines, was not, had a general good idea about, perspective and, how people look, and was not Rob Liefeld, and just a very solid artist. Might not be the most sexy of artists, but Alex Solvik did a phenomenal job. He had a huge run on Web of Spider-Man, and I still think he's an underrated guy. Should get more respect for that. Number 22, we have Ryan Ottley, who was one of the two artists who came on and did Nick Spencer's run on that. Again, a solid artwork, but nothing outrageously sexy about it. So he's on there. Number 21, another not too sexy choice, but another solid Spider-Man artist, Jim Mooney, who came out during the 70s and 80s, did a lot of that stuff with Roger Stern and stuff like that. So good on that as well for him. Number 20 brings us Giuseppe Camuncoli. He was one of the artists during the period where Spider-Man was a by committee storyline, and he was one of the artists, and his artwork is just clean and neat and nice, and has gotten a little bit more credit for other stuff that he's been doing, but Giuseppe Camuncoli has been a wonder and outstanding. Number 19, a lot of people don't like this because of his stylized version of Spider-Man and his other characters, but Chris Bachalo, I kind of like sort of some of the stuff that he does. Yeah, it can get a little out there for a while, but it's still pretty solid and pretty nice. Number 18, Marcos Martin is one of these another ones that's more of an animated sort of style. His artwork is more like cartoony, but it's solid and it's good. And he was also part of the Spider-Man by committee group as well, and did some of the best ones with that. Number 17, we have Keith Pollard. Again, just solid artwork. You know, there are some artists who are absolutely horrendous, like a Jim Fern or Al Milgrom. Sorry. That's just my opinion. But Keith Pollard had some really nice artwork, solid, and is underrated and doesn't get as much credit as he should. Just he's good at drawing muscles, and you know, the some back shots. You see the back muscles in there as well. Like it's what you see when you look at anybody, you see the back muscles. So Keith Pollard's a good, solid artist. Number 16 finds Ryan Stegman, also an artist on Nick Spencer's run as well. Again, sort of similar to Ryan Ottley, but a little bit different, obviously. But the two of them combined for a pretty interesting run. Number 15, we have Greg Land, who is working with the Peter David miniseries. So those are really, like, he's only done 3 or 4 miniseries with Peter David with Spider-Man. He's never really done an actual Spider-Man comic itself, except for those miniseries, but still I consider that part of it because I like, unlike a lot of people, I like Greg Land's artwork because it's photorealistic, and I know that he traces and copies a lot of stuff, but I find his women extraordinarily sexy, and I like the artwork and the style and the stuff like that. So I'm a fan of Greg Land's, even though a lot of people aren't. Number 14, the lamented Mike Waringo, who was an outstanding, another kind of cartoony artist, but still pretty solid in his case, was on the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man before he passed away. Too soon, I should say. He was really, really good, so I had to put him at number 14. Number 13, Rick Lenardi. He did a lot of stuff in early Spider-Mans, like 253, 254 eras with the Rose and some other stuff as well. And then he also went over and did Spider-Man 2099 with Peter David, so I figured I would combine, because he did do work on The Amazing Spider-Man itself, and it's solid and it's good, and I like his artwork. It's very stylized, and I'm keeping him at number 13. Number 12 is Eric Larson. Again, kind of a cartoony sort of thing, but he was a big name right before he went over to Image to do Savage Dragon, but he did a pretty good run on Spider-Man for a while, and I kind of liked his run. He was working with David Michelin on that, and then he ended up doing some of his own writing to prep him for going over to Image doing Savage Dragon, and now he's still doing Savage Dragon. But Eric Larson's still kind of a good one. That's why he's up here at number 12. Number 11, Mike Deodato, who was the artist on the J. Michael Straczynski run. Another really good artist, solid work. A bit more of a sexier kind of, like, because people know who Mike Deodato is. So, we'll see about that. Now we're to the top 10. Top 10, speaking of cartoony, but in a good way, Humberto Ramos, who, a slight sidebar, when Wizard magazine was still around, they were saying comics that we would like to see based on different things, and one of them was a Harry Potter comic drawn by Humberto Ramos, and that would have been absolutely phenomenal. But Humberto Ramos did do some good solid runs on Spider-Man, was part of the Spider-Man by committee, and also did some of Dan Slott's regular run as well, as did, I forgot to say, Giuseppe Camuncoli did that as well. On Dan Slott's run, he was having to do 2 or 3 issues a month, so he had to get multiple artists to come in and do things, so like that. Number 9 is the 1970s artist Gil Kane, a very easily identifiable artwork. His by his nose artwork, you can tell if you look at the way that he does a lot of nasal shots like this. The nose looks, that's Gil Kane. You know it's a Gil Kane shot, and you know it's a Gil Kane nose. but he was the artist on the Harry Osborn drug story, was a good in the late 70s as well, and went on to more fame over in DC doing Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and a few other stuff as well. Green Lantern, Green Arrow is Neil Adams, but that's besides the point. Number 8, I know I always keep saying this, but this guy is probably, of all these, the most solid Spider-Man artist, and a guy who was, on top of stuff and always, kept up with things. Ross Andru came on. I believe he was one of the artists that came on after John Romita Sr. And Gil Kane came in for periodically, but I think Ross Andru was a guy that they kept coming back to because he was good, he was strong, he was consistent, stuff like that. So Ross Andru is number 8. Number 7, Sal Buscema, who has also a very distinct artist style, but the reason why he's on the list is he was the artist on James DeMatteis's amazing run on Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, and again, very distinctive art style. You look at that, you can say that's Sal Buscema. He did some work on the Hulk as well, but Peter Parker Spider-Man was one of the best. A guy who's currently doing Spider-Man, drawing Spider-Man, and has drawn it probably in every decade since the 80s, John Romita Jr. John Romita Jr. came on in the late 80s as an artist, emulating his dad, who we'll get to in a few minutes. Had his own style, and is another distinctive art style. You know who it is. So he worked on Spider-Man for a while, and then he went to Daredevil, had a great run with Ann Nocenti on Daredevil, and then sort of jumped around, did a few other things, did some X-Men work with Chris Claremont, helped create a wonderful version of Nimrod, and a few things as well. He came back, did some Spider-Man in the 90s, not a lot, but did some, and then went off and did his own thing for a while. Came back in the 2000s on Spider-Man, did a few Spider-Man stories, did a storyline with the Committee Spider-Man thing, disappeared again. 2010s, he comes back again, does some artwork for Spider-Man, boom, and now he is presently the artist on the Zeb Wells run Amazing Spider-Man. So he's back being the regular artist on Spider-Man. So John Romita Jr. is the one who's probably drawn Spider-Man the most, and through over 40 years. And again, very distinct art style. It's starting to get on my nerves a little bit now because it's a lot more scratchy than it was early on in his career when it was a lot cleaner. But that could be old age because he's been doing it for 40 years, man. 40 freaking years. Number 5 is Ron Frenz. Ron Frenz was a guy that really took off in the mid 200s of Spider-Man and became a huge Spider-Man artist. Another long-running one as well. So Ron Frenz is number 5. He's still around, but not doing quite as much Spider-Man anymore. Number 4, the original OG Spider-Man artist, Steve Ditko. Very distinctive style. And for the 1960s stuff, was the best person for the job. Also went on to help create Doctor Strange, and I believe Doctor Strange is probably his better known character. Well, that's not true because everyone knows Spider-Man and they know that he did it, but I think Doctor Strange is probably his better storytelling. Spider-Man was fine. It was great. That's why he's number 4, but I just feel that his Doctor Strange was a lot better than the Spider-Man was. That's just me. Number 3, the guy who took on Spider-Man after Steve Ditko decided he was done with Stan Lee, which is a story for another time. John Romita Sr., who, yes, is the father of John Romita Jr. John Romita Sr. has a very clean style, very different than Ditko's sort of scratchy sort of thing. So it was nice to see the difference between a Romita and a Ditko. And that's why I put John Romita slightly ahead of Ditko, because Ditko's was kind of scratchy. Romita's was very, very clean, and obviously birthed the longest running Spider-Man artist of all time. This guy could make a run for that title as well. Mr. Mark Bagley is number 2. Mark Bagley came on after the Eric Larson stuff. He came on during the Clone Wars storyline in the mid to late 300s, around 350, stuff like that. He came on after that, and then went on to draw more than half of the Ultimate Spider-Man with Brian Michael Bendis. He's come back and has done some artwork on Nick Spencer's run a little bit, and is now going to be working with Dan Slott on the new Spider-Man comic that he's coming out later this fall. So Mark Bagley's up there. And if I remember correctly, I think Mark Bagley was the one that won the How to Draw Marvel Comics contest that they had, where it was a artist find the next big artist, writer, inker, whatever. It was a comic book where you were given a story, and if you wanted to be a writer, you would write the stuff and you would hand it in. They would look at it. If they liked it, they would hire you. The artwork, they did that, and with the pencils and then the inks and stuff like that. So I think Mark Bagley was the winner of that and ended up getting in there. But he, again, has a very distinct, artist style. Is probably one of up there, probably the second longest running Spider-Man artist after John Romita Jr., but he's been doing it for a while now too, and it is outstanding, and I really like his stuff as well. And finally, number one, of course, is Mr. Todd McFarlane. Now, despite what you may think about Todd McFarlane kind of being a douchebag, he did draw this. This is the cover of Spider-Man #1, and it's what got Spider-Man fans excited when Dave Michelin took over and they created Venom together. McFarlane came in there because he had done some work on the Hulk, also did some work on Batman Year 2. So he was an up-and-comer, and Spider-Man is really probably his most, well, after Spawn, because he created Spawn, but after Spawn, Spider-Man is probably the one that Todd McFarlane is most known for as well. And despite the fact of him being a complete and utter douchebag, he's still a goddamn good Spider-Man artist. That's why he's number one on my list. So that was the top 25 Spider-Man artists. And I'm running out of time here, but let's get moving here. Top 10 Spider-Man villains. Now, Spider-Man has one of the best villain groups out there. But I decided, instead of adding it, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I have another 10 honorable mention, but we're not going to put those in any order. So we'll just do the top 10 Spider-Man villains, and then we'll get to the honorable mention ones. Number 10 is Sandman. Yes, a man made of sand, hard to fight, can solidify his sand. He's an interesting character, was created early on in Spider-Man, run by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, had an appearance in the movies, and he's my number 10. Number 9, of course, is Venom. I'm not the biggest Venom fan. I know everybody in the world loves Venom and Carnage, stuff like that. I'm not the biggest Venom fan, but I have to put him on the list because he is one of Spider-Man's top villains, who's also a hero, companion, so he's been a little bit of everything, anti-hero, stuff like that, and other things as well. So moving on from that. Number 8, we have the Shocker, which is a good design. And his power using electrical bracelets that shoot electrical stuff is really kind of cool. Number 7, we have Scorpion, which is a kind of interesting character with that's another one I would put there. Has the big long tail that hits stuff and stuff like that. So pretty good about that. Number 6 is Electro. They kind of ruined him in the movies, though Jamie Foxx did a pretty good job of him in the most recent Spider-Man movie. But the Electro is a character that's made entirely up of electricity, and again is a tough fight for Spider-Man. Number 5, the Chameleon. Fighting somebody who can be anybody is outstanding, and he's one of Spider-Man's biggest villains because he does a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff as well. Number 4, I know people are going to probably yell at me about this, but this is my list. Green Goblin is number 4. I find this is his Joker. I find Green Goblin is overexposed. He's been in every version of the Spider-Man movies and TV shows and movies and stuff like that. And it's a good character, but again, you get to the point like with the Joker, things get a little overdone and move on. Number 3 is Kraven the Hunter. Again, Kraven's Last Stand is great, but even before then, just a pure hunter hunting a spider sort of thing was really cool. Number 2 had to be Doc Ock. Doc Ock, I think, is probably Spider-Man's his best villain, but the reason I put him in number 2 is because I like this other villain ahead of Doc Ock. Number 1 is Mysterio. I just like the design of the costume, and I am so happy that even though I don't like Jake Gyllenhaal, I think he did a phenomenal job as Electro in the Spider-Man movies, and I just like the design of it. Honorable mention now, J. Jonah Jameson is not really up there as a main villain because now he's kind of Spider-Man's friend, but for the longest time, he was more of an antagonist and problematic for Spider-Man. You need to have somebody like that, and I just had to put him on the list. Next up, we have Hobgoblin, which was a spinoff of the Green Goblin because they couldn't do Green Goblin after killing Norman Osborn off and turning Harry Osborn into a good guy, but they couldn't have someone else be Green Goblin. So they created the Hobgoblin, which is a very good orange sort of skinned villain, and I kind of like that as well. I might miss a little bit of the first of the game, but that's all right. Next up is the Lizard, which is kind of interesting because he's a friend of Peter's, Dr. Kirk Connors. But when he's the Lizard, he has his own animalistic stuff, and they're doing a lot of good stuff with the character now. Next up was the Spot, which is he's not a very big Spider-Man villain, but he will be appearing in the Spider-Man animated Spider-Verse sequel coming up as the main bad guy. It's a really interesting design, a whole white body with his body surrounded by black holes, which if you put your fist in, you go to another dimension, stuff like that. It's kind of a great character. Stegron is a dinosaur villain who's teamed up with the Lizard before. It's just kind of neat to see a dinosaur stylized villain. Is a very clean villain look, and I love it a lot. Next up, we have Hydra Man, which is the opposite of Sandman, but you need to have it. You have an all sand character, so why not do an all water character, and why not? Next up is Carrion. Not a lot of people know about him, but Carrion was a ghastly zombie-looking thing that had this red dust that killed people and turned them into zombies. He was a vicious character who only appeared in the Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man series, but I liked him in his limited amount of time. Next up, we have the Rhino, who is a character that is always going to be around, sort of like similar to the Juggernaut, but is a little bit easier to take down. So Spider-Man did have some experience with like a Juggernaut type, but the Rhino was a little bit easier to take down than the Juggernaut was. Next up is the Prowler, who's not really a villain, but when he started out, he was a villain. Another clean design. Fortnite created a avatar of Prowler, which is gorgeous, and it's fun to see him in there. Next up, we have the Spider Slayer, which is J. Jonah Jameson's claim to fame, where he paid someone to create a robotics to hunt down Spider-Man, but it always bites J. Jonah Jameson in the ass in the end. And finally, Tarantula, who is a Spanish character who has pointy chews, as they like to say. So, like that here. Yeah, I got a lot to go, and I might not make it, so I'm going to probably miss a little bit of football. So we'll just keep going on. Top 10 Spider-Man love interests. Taking a little creative license in here because I'm using people from other series as well. Number 10, we have Deborah Whitman. She was one of Peter's love interests in the Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man comic, but it was kind of problematic because Peter was kind of gaslighting her, and she was not the best character, nicest, sweetest, whatever. Kind of a problematic character that sort of devolved into kind of a madness sort of thing over her belief that Peter Parker was indeed Spider-Man, and he continually gaslighted her. And that was I put that on the writer's fault. And I would love to do like a comic that would sort of examine the Deborah Whitman stuff from a different angle and maybe add a little capper to it so that it turns out better. Number 9 is Anna Maria Marconi, who was a love interest, is where the creative license comes in, was a love interest to Spider-Man, but the superior Spider-Man, the Doc Ock version of Spider-Man. She believed it was Peter Parker, but it was Otto Octavius who fell in love with her. She's a dwarf, which is kind of a new character. You've never seen anything like that before. She's hugely intelligent, and that is why Doc Ock was enamored of her. And once he left Peter's body, it became uncomfortable between her and Anna, and they broke up. I mean, she found out the truth, I think, about it eventually. Next up, number 8 is Silk. Silk is a character you're going to probably see in the Madam Web movie, I believe, but she's a problematic character due to the fact that she has a spider-esque totem as well as Peter does, and her whole reason for being is to fuck Spider-Man, because they're two spider characters and it's their job to mate to continue the spider species. It's like a spider version of Ponfar, the Klingon, Captain Mr. Spock sort of sex thing that he goes through. So Silk and Peter shoot off pheromones at each other, and they fight well together, but then they have to fuck afterwards because it's so. It's kind of problematic, but she's gotten her own series, and I think they've backed away from that a little bit, but that's indeed what the case was with that. From Ultimate Spider-Man, again, creative license. This was one of my favorite relationships that Peter ever had with Kitty Pryde of the Ultimate Spider-Man universe. I thought it was a amazing duo. I thought it was lovely, and I wish they would have, maybe sort of shifted the real Kitty Pryde in love with Peter Parker here in the 616. But the fact is, we got a really wonderful relationship between Peter and Kitty in Ultimate Spider-Man. So I'll have to give props for that. Number 6, we have Betty Brant, who was worked at the Daily Bugle, was Peter's first love for the most part as a high school photographer for the Daily Bugle. Fell in love with Betty Brant. They did a couple dating and they did some stuff later on, but never really amounted to anything. She ended up marrying Ned Leeds, who turned out to be the Hobgoblin. And now she's still around, but I don't know exactly what she's doing anymore. Number 5 is Mockingbird. Yes, the Mockingbird, who was married to Hawkeye. She was a member of S.H.I.E.L.D., and during Dan Slott's run, they teamed up together and sparks flew. It didn't last for long, but it was kind of sweet to see Mockingbird and Spider-Man back together, kind of interesting. Number 4, we have Carly Cooper, who was the main love interest during the Dan Slott run, with the exception of the Superior Spider-Man storyline. She knew she found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, and they're still friends now, but she was a love interest for a long period of time during Dan Slott's run. Number 3 is the Black Cat, a villainess who, sort of like Catwoman, who became a lover of Spider-Man's, and they did a lot of stuff during the mid 200 episodes, where 200 issues, where they were fucking a lot and working together and stuff like that. She's very sexy, and she's starting to come into her own now in the Marvel universe. Has a connection to Iron Man. Is going to be doing a Mary Jane team up with her and Black Cat, and actually not Mary Jane and Peter are now broken up again. Thanks you, Zeb Wells, you dick. Black Cat is back in the picture again. So, and she's also in the Peter David, Greg Land miniseries. She's the love interest in that one as well. Number 2, of course, everyone might think I'm crazy, but Gwen Stacy is number 2. Everyone believed that she is his ultimate soulmate. I have to disagree with that. Though Gwen Stacy was a great character, and I think it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if she would have lived. And then the whole, when we get a little creepy sort of story about her and Norman Osborn, I'm going to make a little suggestion that I would like to see with that storyline. But yeah, Gwen Stacy number 2, and finally number 1, of course, has to be Mary Jane Watson. They literally got married. They were husband and wife. Literally. And she's always been there, always been around, and is always strong, and is always tough, and is sexy as hell as well. And just she is the perfect match for Peter, and I hate when writers don't see that. Zeb Wells, asshole. Dan Slott did it because he had to, but he introduced and weaved her in variously during his run, but he had to due to the One More Day BS that Joe Quesada put out there. So Spider-Man is one of the most popular characters out there. He has had a number of series. These aren't all of them, but Amazing Spider-Man is the main series that he's worked on, still out there now. Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man was the first spinoff, was great stories and different stories than the Amazing Spider-Man ones. Introduced a lot of new villains that you don't see very much anymore. Marvel Team Up, one of my all-time favorite ones, where Spider-Man teamed up with another hero or a team done by different creative teams, stuff like that. It's just great stuff. Web of Spider-Man was the third main Spider-Man book that came out, and the 3 of them, Peter Parker, Web, and Amazing, had crossovers during that late 80s, early 90s period. Spider-Man, this is the cover to number 1, that Todd McFarlane was given once he wanted to become a writer, so he started writing. He only stayed on for about maybe 10, 12 issues, and then he left to go create Image. So we had that Spider-Man Unlimited, which was a quarterly double-sized comic that had various other one-shot stories and stuff like that. Sometimes they used it to fill in the blanks of the regular series, but in the end, it was more along the lines that there was Ron Lim did some artwork for it and stuff like that. So they're right there. Superior Spider-Man got his own series. They rebooted it when he came in there. That lasted about 36 issues. So that's impressive. Spider-Man Tangled Web was more of a grown-up, sort of adult sort of storyline. The storylines were a bit more dramatic and not super villain related. They were a little bit more crazy. Web Spinners, Spider-Man was another one of those types of tangled webs where the storylines were a little off kilter, were a little weird, stuff like that. Peter Parker Spider-Man was the spinoff of, after they canceled Spectacular Spider-Man, they decided we should bring it back, but call it Peter Parker Spider-Man so it's not connected to the other one. Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, Peter David came on to write that with Mike Wieringo artwork, and did some other stuff as well. And that's I don't think that's out anymore now. Untold Tales of Spider-Man was the one that Kurt Busiek wrote, and is wonderful storylines like that. Marvel Tales is one of the older ones where comics would be reprinted. So if you wanted to read some of the older Spider-Man comics, but didn't want to pay or couldn't find them at stores or whatever, Marvel Tales would reprint them. And that's how I read a lot of these early Spider-Man books, because Marvel Tales reprinted them. Sometimes they had new covers on them. Sometimes they used the same cover from the series, but it was a reprint, so it's not worth anything, but it was nice to read the stuff in comic book format from the old days. X-Men did it as well with Classic X-Men, but they added a little wrinkle to it where they added a secondary story, which was created by a new writer and artist that was connected to that story that was in there. Nonstop Spider-Man was the Chris Bachalo story, a comic that didn't last as long. They thought it was going to be a regular series. It's not. Savage Spider-Man is out there now. Don't know really much about that because I just didn't look good to me. The Avenging Spider-Man lasted about 20-some issues. Don't know much about that. Sensational Spider-Man was another one I didn't know really much about, but it's up there at that. Ultimate Spider-Man, of course, Spider-Man 2099, and the Miles Morales Spider-Man were all different titles we had there. Almost done. Can I do it in 9 minutes? I don't think so. So I'm going to miss a little bit of the Ravens game. That's all right. Best Spider-Man movies. Number 9, Spider-Man 3. Need I say more? Terrible adding Sandman and Venom to it. I like Topher Grace, but his Venom was awful. The whole dancing Spider-Man sequence, the terrible addition of Gwen Stacy, what was Ron Howard's daughter, but it just seemed forced. Harry Osborn becoming the Green Goblin and then losing his memory and then falling back in love with Mary Jane after Mary Jane left Peter because he was acting stupid. The whole dance thing, the meme you see all the time. Awful, just awful. And that was not really Sam Raimi. He wanted to do something with the Vulture, who didn't show up on my villains list, but maybe should. But just the fact that he's an old dude in the comics just didn't seem right for him beating up old dudes. But he wanted to do the Vulture, or he wanted to do a Mysterio sort of thing, but they sort of forced Sandman and Green Goblin and Venom into the story. So it was a mess. And that's why it's number 9. Number 8 is Amazing Spider-Man number 2, sort of similar like that. They brought in the Rhino for a very quick thing, but that was terrible. They brought in a Harry Osborn who was absolutely horrendous, and his Green Goblin aspect. And they also had the Electro, Jamie Foxx Electro, which was terrible. Falls into a vat of electric eels and becomes Electro. No, come on, man. Do it like Max Dillon. He's an electrician. He gets shot by lightning while on top of power lines, and that's how it becomes, Electro. Come on, man. That's not that hard. And the whole Gwen Stacy dying thing was the hardest part about that. And also in one of the deleted scenes, they were going to bring back Peter's dad, which would have been a mess. They were trying to set up a whole bunch of stuff. Didn't work. But Andrew Garfield was a decent Spider-Man, as we see in later movies. And he deserves a third movie because the others, Toby got one. And what's his face? Who's doing it now? Is doing it as well. I forget the fucking Zendaya, and how the fuck is I can't. My mind doesn't work because I'm freaking out about missing the football game. So Spider-Man No Way Home. Tom Holland, that's what it was. Yeah. So number 7, Tom Holland, Spider-Man Homecoming. Well, I liked seeing Michael Keaton brought in as a Vulture. The first Spider-Man movie of the Tom Holland era was kind of a mess. You brought in Robert Downey Jr. for a extended cameo, was okay. You get some take of Spider-Man in school and a little bit of Zendaya in there, but it just it was okay. It was not phenomenal for me personally, but I like Michael Keaton as a villain. That was good. Number 6, we have The Amazing Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield's first movie was actually pretty good. I still think he's probably the best Spider-Man, but he just had the worst stories to deal with. You brought the Lizard in. You kept it sort of simple. And you introduced Gwen Stacy, and him and Emma had such great chemistry that they started dating. So it was nice to see that. So Amazing Spider-Man is number 6. Number 5, Tobey Maguire's original Spider-Man. Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn is fantastic. His Green Goblin is great. A great introduction to Spider-Man lore, a great movie. Number 5. Number 4, Spider-Man Far From Home. I'm surprised how much I really like that movie. Because I'm not a Jake Gyllenhaal fan, but the fact that you got him and Zendaya together because they have extraordinarily awesome chemistry, that they started dating. And Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio was actually one of the better villains out there and was great costume design and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed that story. It was a lot of fun. Number 3 is cheating a little bit. It's not live action, but the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, you got to love it. It is the best animated version of Spider-Man. You could technically make the case that it is the best Spider-Man movie, but I'm trying to make it as live action, stuff like that. So that's why it's number 3, but it's well worth it. I'm looking forward to the sequels. They should be extraordinary. It should be great. Number 2, we have Spider-Man 2. The second Tobey Maguire movie is pretty much the most perfect Spider-Man movie of all time. Alfred Molina's Doc Ock is great. The storyline is wonderful. Just outstanding performances by everybody, and it's the best of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans. Finally, number 1, of course, why wouldn't it be Spider-Man No Way Home, the introduction of the multiverse, Doctor Strange involved, Tobey and Andrew making appearances, the old villains, Willem Dafoe and Sandman, the Lizard, and Doc Ock, Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, and all that stuff just coming back, and the death of Aunt May and all kinds. It was just an intense, wonderful movie, outstanding, and that's why it's number 1. Honorable mention, this was not a movie, but the live action TV show with Nicholas Hammond was one of my jams during the 70s. In retrospect, it's a terrible looking, but it was still a lot of fun. Some highlights real quick of Spider-Man. Aunt May is probably one of the most important characters in his comics, and she's not around as much, which is fine, but for a while there, she was the one, his rock, stuff like that. But her love for him is outstanding. When she discovered he was Spider-Man, how she helped him out by keeping his identity secret was great. Doc Ock having a relationship with her is outstanding. I think that's wonderful. And she was married to J. Jonah Jameson's father, which made J. Jonah Jameson and Peter Parker be stepbrothers, which is outstanding. The Human Torch is his best friend. I love that dynamic when the Human Torch appears between the two of them. Deadpool can also make a case for being one of Peter's best friends, but Human Torch is still Peter's best friend. But Deadpool and Spider-Man together is also kind of insane. Matt Murdock and him having their connection as well is another wonderful sort of aspect, which I'd like to see, which weaves its way through various things as well. Jessica Jones actually made a pretty interesting thing where we learned that she had gone to school with Peter Parker and actually kind of liked him when they were in high school, but she never did anything about, approaching her or whatever. But that could have been an interesting sort of connection as well. He has an in-canon sister, which I thought was a phenomenal idea, who's now a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. So that's why he never knew about her, because she was taken and became a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent because their parents were S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. So I thought that's great. And have her pop up periodically is wonderful. Flash Thompson becoming his bully in high school to friends in college and being shipped off to Vietnam, coming back from Vietnam and being unable to walk. No, that didn't happen. So he came back. So Vietnam, that happened later on, and the whole Vietnam stuff. And then he went back out in the 90s when war happened. Then that's when he got paralyzed. But then Venom took him over and he became a heroic Venom and worked well with Spider-Man. So, and Flash and Peter became sort of really good friends. So I kind of like that as well. He is an Avenger and also an honorary member of the Fantastic Four, as well as the new Fantastic Four, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, him, and the Incredible Hulk. So that's kind of funny. The Punisher's first appearance was in Spider-Man, maybe Spider-Man number 127, something like that. Harry Osborn went from being his best friend to being an enemy in Green Goblin to being his friend again to dying to coming back, being his enemy again, and now being his friend again. So that's an interesting sort of relationship. Norman Osborn is his big bad, the one that's always there, has died, come back so many times, not funny, has had other weird stuff happen between him and Peter and stuff like that. The weirdest thing, though, is now Norman Osborn, thanks Zeb Wells, is like Spider-Man's like mentor now and helps him out because he's trying to do good. J. Jonah Jameson, stepbrothers, enemies to friends. They were enemies for so long, and then they sat down, had a dinner. Chip Zdarsky wrote, and Peter revealed himself to J. Jonah Jameson, and then J. Jonah Jameson became enamored with the idea of helping him, and that sort of went on from there. Other really good cast members of the ensemble: Robbie Robertson and Liz Allen as well. So like that. So it is 1:00. Ravens football's on, and I have just one little bit here: the weirdest Spider-Man stories, and then I'm out. Hydra Man and Sandman combined into a mud monster was one of my favorite stories growing up. I thought, wouldn't that be cool if the two of them did that? The Stegron Lizard crossover at Christmas time was another good one that I enjoyed that I didn't write down. The Extra Armed Spider-Man, where he took on Morbius. Yes, that Morbius. It's Morbin time. Morbius made his first appearance, I think, in Spider-Man. He became an extra armed Spider-Man, so he had multiple arms at one point, which was crazy. J. Michael Straczynski's storyline created him into a spider vampire who Morlun was a pretty vicious villain who was sent back in time to destroy all the spider totems, end up almost killing Spider-Man, but then he sort of was able to be regenerated and came back out and became sort of a spider vampire where he would suck the blood of the villain, stuff like that. Thank God this has been retconned out, but this is written by J. Michael Straczynski, so this is bad. Gwen Stacy sleeping with Norman Osborn is absolutely disgusting. Was a terrible storyline, and it fit and it was weird during that time from when Captain Stacy died before she came back, and she died. She was over in London for a long period of time. I guess it was 9 months because the original story had Norman Osborn and her sleeping together. She got pregnant, gave birth to twins. Norman took the twins over, grew them up, and released them into the story. That's where the story came in. That is a terrible story. Gwen Stacy was only like 18 years old, and Norman Osborn is just this creepy old dude to seduce her. And the fact that she was seduced by him while suffering from the loss of her father and still conflicted about her love for Peter, to be seduced by Norman Osborn, that's disgusting. And then to get her pregnant, ew, come on, man, that's disgusting. And then it was an idea. It's like, oh, he can bring back someone who looks like Gwen Stacy, and then he'll be all fricked up in his head and stuff like that. Luckily, Nick Spencer to the rescue. Nick Spencer retconned that shit out. And it was a memory implanted in Norman Osborn to fuck with his head, which I think was great. He created these clones of a Gwen Stacy and like a Peter Parker, the twins. He created them, but did not have sex with Gwen Stacy at all, which was just, yeah. But my thing would have been, it would have been better if they wouldn't have had Norman Osborn sleep with Gwen Stacy, have Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker sleep together. After her father dies, she's pregnant, doesn't know she's pregnant yet. But she leaves, finds out she's pregnant, but doesn't want to tell Peter, has the kids over in London, gives them up for adoption. Norman Osborn discovers them, takes them, and creates them into villains, and then brings them back, and he actually has to take on his actual kids with Gwen Stacy. That would have been a better story, but no, they had to do the creepy Norman Osborn, but thank Christ for Nick Spencer. One More Day was a J. Michael Straczynski, Joe Quesada thing. Joe Quesada never like the idea of Peter Parker being married to Mary Jane. So during Civil War, he had Peter Parker reveal himself to be, or Spider-Man to reveal himself to be Peter Parker, which put his life in danger, and in turn created One More Day, where Spider-Man and Mary Jane made a deal with the devil, the literal devil Mephisto, that in order to let Aunt May live, because she was shot and it was dying, in order to make Aunt May survive, Peter Parker and Mary Jane would have to stop being married and stop being in love with each other. And if they agreed to that, no one would know that he was Spider-Man, and Peter and MJ would break up and Aunt May would be alive. And it was a way to reconnect Spider-Man to what Quesada said is how people like him, as being a single guy out there, just living his life and not being a married dude. And if done properly, you could have done an excellent story with a married Spider-Man. Nick Spencer did it. He wasn't quite married to Mary Jane, but she was a presence in his life during his run, and it worked fine. It was just awful. And Dan Slott, unfortunately, had to go with that. And he created Carly to do so, and so it's like that. So he had to run with that because that was what it was. But eventually they said, we got to get them back together because come on. So just the fact that he made a literal deal with the devil and that he broke up the love with Mary Jane was just despicable. Now, Nick Spencer, again, thank God for Nick Spencer, he sort of put a different spin on it, different perspective on it. So he was able to change up a little bit. So may it be that Mephisto was afraid of the child they were going to have was going to overthrow him or something like that. So that's kind of interesting. The Clone Saga is all over the freaking place. I stopped reading Spider-Man around that time, but it was like a 3-year long storyline with all kinds of crazy, weird stuff and just bizarre blah, 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 blah. So like that. So that was just insane storyline. Back in the 70s, you had to get into that 70s sort of vibe. So you had the Spider Car, where Spider-Man was driving around in a 4-wheel buggy, and then the Rocket Racer, who was a skateboard villain, and Big Wheel, who was a giant wheel that was rolling through the city and shooting stuff up, and the disco villain, I forget his name, who was a disco bad guy, and White Tiger, who was an Asian martial artist, sort of thing. Absolutely crazy. But it was the 70s. Mexican wrestler villain, Los Muertos, who only got 2 issues, but now Sony's like, it's going to be the best Spider-Man movie ever. That's just stupid. Once Peter Parker got rid of the symbiote at Reed Richards' Fantastic Four building, he had to keep his identity secret, so he found an old Fantastic Four outfit and a bag on his head, and that was one of the popular costumes out there. It's funny. Spider-Ham, there was a series of comics called Peter Porker Spider-Man for kids, animal puns, but he's a great character, came back in the Spider-Verse stuff. And finally, Peter David's storyline after Jean DeWolf that he'd been laying the groundwork for through his whole run on Peter Parker, I don't think it ever came to fruition, was a man dressed as Santa Claus going to kids and saying, I need to come into your house to do some investigation before Christmas and take some stuff, and then would tie up the kids and the family and then take their stuff and then leave. So that's good. I got to go because it is football time, but thank you for watching the 9th anniversary show, Spider-Man 60th anniversary. I love Spider-Man. I hope this was helpful, and I'm sorry if it seemed a little rushed, but got to go.